So when we're talking about the production possibilities frontier, you're also going to see this on the internet and some of the resources that I provide described as the production possibilities curve, which is the PPC. And these things are exactly the same. They're equivalent. So don't worry about it. If you see one, two names, same thing. So production possibility frontier, production possibility curve takes a zoom out. And instead of looking at an individual consumer, now we're looking at a whole economy. So we're still looking at two goods because, again, we only have the ability to graph in two dimensions, right? We're not, IQ 3000 brains, and we can't graph in 5 dimensions. So we only are going to graph in 2 dimensions. So it's still this kind of, toy world, right? We talked about how models, all models are simplifications of reality. And instead of 2 specific goods, now we're going to talk about 2 more generic categories of goods, right? So the example we're going to use today is healthcare and education. And so one of the things that we need to remember, there's important distinctions between production possibilities, frontiers, and budget constraints. The first one being that they're talking about 2 different entities, right? Individual budget constraints talking about a household or a person. Production possibility curve or frontier is talking about a country. The second part that we have to remember is there's not a straight trade-off happening, right? That was what happened with the budget constraint. The reason why that happened with the budget constraint was because the price of the goods didn't change, right? Burgers were always $2, bus passes were always 50 cents. So if I gave up a burger, I always got 4 extra bus passes, right? My opportunity cost was the same. Didn't matter where I was in terms of how many burgers I was consuming or how many bus tickets I was consuming. That opportunity cost never changed. Now we have a thing that's a bit more difficult. It's bowed out like this. It looks like a bubble. And that's why it's called a production possibility curve at times. And so this is to represent the fact that when we get to these points of extreme, right? Let's say we're at this point right here, where we're spending almost all of our resources on healthcare, and we're spending, a third or a fourth of what we could be spending as an economy on education if we were to completely forego healthcare, right? If we're at this situation, getting some more schooling, right? Getting, just 2 more of these little ticks here of schooling is going to require a very small sacrifice of healthcare, right? So when we go from this point to this point, we're giving up, pretty much just 1 unit of healthcare in order to get 3 units of education. So when we are a healthcare heavy economy, diversifying into the thing that we're not heavy in provides a lot of bang for our buck, right? For every $1 that we stop spending in healthcare, we're going to get $3 extra spent in the education sector. Similarly, right, if we're on the flip side of the situation, and if we are in a, education-focused paradigm, and we decide that we want to get some, let's say that we decide to do a similar thing where we want a 1 unit change in education. Well, the 1 unit in education, when we are in that dynamic, is going to result in a, 3.5 increase in my healthcare by just decreasing this by 1. So all this to just say that the opportunity costs don't stay the same. And the reason why they don't stay the same is because when we're at these different extremes, we've been shoving square pegs into round holes, right? When we're at these extremes, we're taking doctors and we're putting them into classrooms. we're converting hospitals into schools, right? We are taking nurses and having them be teachers' assistants or whatever the case may be. So the resources within the economy are very diverse, and they are suited for different things. And so whenever we get to these endpoints, these extremes, it becomes, again, we get more of a bang for our buck. We get more of the other thing when we decrease the thing that we are heavily involved in as an economy. So let's take a step back. Let's just talk about the different points along the production possibility curve. So we've got all these different points here, A, B, C, D, and F. And, you know, in A, we have all the resources going to healthcare, right? With B, we've got most resources going to healthcare. With D, we have most resources going to education. And with F, we have all of the resources going to education. So the society could choose any point along this line, but could the society choose to produce at this point G?
Well, it's beyond what we can afford.
It's beyond our capabilities. So it's beyond the amount of land and capital and humans that we have to produce that amount of stuff in a given period of time. So anything outside of the PPF is infeasible. Or not feasible, since I think infeasible is not a word. So not achievable, not allowed. Anything on the line, right, is achievable or feasible. And we would say that these things that are on the line are what we call productively efficient. And I know it's so aggravating. Economics has these multiple terms, right? We've got accounting profit and economic profit. We've got productively efficient, and you're like, well, the fact that we had a modifier on it probably means there's going to be a different type of efficient. And you're absolutely right. There's another efficient coming in a second. I know, it's annoying, but it's just what it is. So productively efficient talks about the fact that we're not leaving any resources on the table, right? So if we were, say, at this point H, would that be feasible? Yes. It's within the production possibility curve. Would that be productively efficient? No, right? Absolutely. We're leaving, you know, all of this education on the table, right? We could increase our education without decreasing our health care. And so as a result, the fact that we can increase one thing without decreasing the other means that this is feasible, but productively inefficient. Inefficient. And with this, you can just say inefficient, because if something's productively inefficient, then it's necessarily the next type of efficient, which we'll talk about in a second. Actually, we're just going to talk about it right now. So, productively efficient means to be along the curve. The next type of efficiency is what's called allocative efficiency. An allocative efficiency has to do with the mix of goods and services produced and how it represents the mix that society most desires. So this happens when the mix of goods produced represents the mix that society most desires. And so when we're looking at this, right, it's kind of difficult for us to figure out what is allocatively efficient. We don't know what society most desires. Now, there are 2 points on here that I bet we could take out as allocatively efficient, right? And what points would those be? A and F, right? Those extreme points. So most of us don't want to live in a situation where there's no health care and all the money is spent towards education. Similarly, most of us don't want to live in a situation where we spend all the resources on health care and we don't have any resources devoted to education. So A and F are going to be the only 2 that we think of as can't be productively efficient, but D could be productively efficient, C could be productively efficient, B, I mean, really anywhere, along this middle part of the line could be productively efficient. But you have to be allocatively efficient in order to be productively efficient. Or sorry, opposite. You have to be productively efficient. You have to be on the line and be productively efficient in order to be this allocatively efficient. Questions on that? So the productive inefficiency, let's get that in your notes too, because again, if we don't write it down, we're not going to remember it completely. So let's get this productive efficiency in your notes as well. So when it's impossible to produce more of one good or service without decreasing the quantity produced of another good or service. And then lastly, for production possibility frontier rather, let's talk about the shape. I talked about it a little bit at the beginning. I don't think I did a very good job, so let's talk about it again. So the shape of the PPF, why is it shaped the way it is? It's because of the law of diminishing returns. Which is similar to the law of diminishing marginal utility. That's just a more specific case of the law of diminishing returns. Law of diminishing returns says that as additional increments of resources to produce a good or service are added, the marginal benefit from those additional increments will decline. So that's why the opportunity cost is changing, and that's why the slope of the curve is changing, and we don't end up with a straight line like we did with the budget constraint. We end up with a bowed out line. excuse me. What is the last difference between our budget constraint and our production possibility frontier? For extra credit, get out of jail free card. What is the last difference? So the first difference is it has to do with a country, not a person. The second difference is it's not a straight line, it's bowed out. What's the third difference? This is our production possibility frontier. Let's go up to our budget constraint.
Is there an opportunity cost?
There's opportunity costs in both. That's very good. Opportunity costs in both. What do we see on this graph that we didn't see on the other graph? Numbers. Very good. Yes. When we're talking about economies, we don't know the numbers. It's an imaginary economy, right? We don't know the maximum amount of healthcare spending if we didn't spend anything on education. We don't know the maximum amount of education spending if we didn't spend anything on healthcare, right? So with budget constraints, we have numbers because we're given a budget and we're given prices. With the production possibility frontier, it is all kind of ephemeral, made up stuff, right? It is just relative changes. Relative changes. Excellent job. Please come talk to me after class and make sure to get you that extra credit, get out of jail free card on your grade book. Okay, good stuff, good stuff.